I 36 female. I'm the oldest of 3 kids. My brother Percy is 34, male, and the youngest of us is my sister Molly, who's 28, female. Growing up, Percy and I were raised normally, but for some reason Molly was treated like she was literally the princess. I guess it was the fact that she was kind of a surprise for our parents. And then we add to the fact that she was the youngest, but she was always treated differently. And I think that's part of the reason why she grew up to be a totally spoiled brat. My dad had some sense and would still reprimand her and try to get her to behave. But my mother, no. There was no chance that she would ever say a word against her dearest Molly. And neither would she tolerate it if anybody else dared to speak up against her behavior, which was obnoxious to say the least. Percy and I were significantly older than her, so until the age of 25, we just took everything that she said with a pinch of salt and tried not to mind. Mind you, she says some pretty horrible stuff to us when she was in her teens. Not only did she constantly make fun of our appearance, since she believed that she was the prettiest of us all, but the worst part was that we couldn't even deny it, because she did inherit our mother's genes, and she actually was quite attractive. But on top of that, she would also make fun of weird stuff like the mages we had chosen, the line of work that we were in and whatnot. One time at Thanksgiving, we got into a major fight with her because she had just straight up told Percy that he was going to be an unemployed burden on the family just because he was a literature major. And another time we ended up not speaking for weeks because she had told me that if I continued to work for hours every day, I would never be able to find a boyfriend with my eye bags, since nobody wants people who aren't even attractive, and on top of that, can't even give them time. So this is just the kind of person that she is, overly boisterous and egoistic and constantly belittling people around her. She has always been this way, and this kind of behavior has only ever been encouraged by our mother. My dad just turned a blind eye, but my mother used to laugh at the things that she said. No matter how hurt the other person felt, she would always pass it off as a joke. And even though we could tell from Molly's face that she was completely serious, and she would tell us not to get offended at it, and she would claim that we were being sensitive if we tried to retaliate. So Molly always had our mother wrapped around her finger. We hated her for that. And then 8 years ago, after my father passed away, we finally started drifting apart, and both Percy and I started seeing less of our mother and Molly. I guess in spite of the fact that he also favored Molly, maybe not as much as our mother did, but to a certain extent, he was still the glue that was holding the family together. And once he was gone, Percy and I really didn't feel like visiting Molly and our mother on the holidays, or seeing them as often as we used to when our father had fallen sick. So after his demise, we would only meet them at family events hosted by other people, occasionally on Thanksgiving and maybe on Christmas. Some years, if we felt like it, we were honestly better off for it because they did not try to keep in touch with us either. Since my dad was very well off, and so was my mother. They had enough money to get by, and Percy and I had also managed to construct a life for ourselves independently. It seemed like Percy and I were on one side, and my mother and Molly were on the other, and there was this wall between us. I personally prefer the wall, and anyhow, that's how the connection has been between the 4 of us. And so I really don't think that they should have any expectations from me, because I don't have any from them. But now I learned the scenario on their end might be a little different. A couple of weeks ago, I helped Percy out with his medical bills after he had fractured his ankle. And since his insurer has only covered hospital bills, I had to take care of all the other expenses like his medication, visits to the physiotherapist, and hiring a full-time nurse for him so he would have somebody to help him out since he lives alone. He tried to convince me not to pay for all of this since he could really afford it, but he was in between jobs right now, and I really didn't want him to spend his money until he had been able to build his online magazine that he had been hoping to start, which is why he has abandoned his teaching career in the first place. Besides, I am the CFO of a firm, and we are doing very well financially, so money is not a problem for me, and I was pleased to assist my brother out. But for some reason, when my mother and Molly found out about it, they believed that this was a free pass to ask me for whatever that they wanted, and I was just going to hand it out to them like I was Santa Claus. And that's why I'm in the predicament, and right now, since I said no to assisting out. Molly was getting her first apartment, so obviously that really pissed her and my mother off pretty bad. 3 days ago, I randomly received a phone call from Molly when I was working, and she informed me that she had discovered an apartment that she really liked, and she wanted to buy it because now that she was 28, it was getting embarrassing for her to tell anyone that she was still living with her mother. She wanted to move out and needed my assistance paying for the apartment because she could only afford to pay for half of it because penthouse apartments are quite expensive. Now that she was aware of my assistance in covering his medical costs, she asked me for another favor. We had hardly had a genuine talk in the previous 8 years, which is why it seemed so strange. Additionally, the majority of our meetings were forced upon us. She would struggle mightily, even in that case, to be polite to us. And now she believed that all I had to do was agree to cover the cost of her first apartment. In background, Molly works as a freelance graphic designer, and if she had completed any work at all, I would have admired that. She has never attended a design school, holds no design degree, and in my opinion, she is not qualified to work as a graphic designer if all she did was create a few posters for her father's company that he never used. She can therefore, very naturally, act as though she exclusively works with select clientele. However, the majority of these privileged clientele are her family, and even in those cases, she only works with them because my mother coerces them into giving her tasks so she can stay occupied. It's not a profession. At best, it's a hobby. Therefore, it's not shocking that she ended up moving in with our mother up to this point. I informed her up front that there was nothing I could do to assist her. Her age was 28. She was able to pay for the apartment on her own by getting a genuine job. Even though he had the money, she claimed that I had assisted Percy with his medical bills, when in reality, I hadn't. Furthermore, no one was making an effort to assist her. It was sort of my responsibility as the bigger sibling to take care of her. However, I informed her that things were different with Percy, since I had supported him when he was between jobs, and because he has made an effort to build a positive connection with me. She is not like that, and I have no need to assist her. It goes without saying that I told her none of this. I simply said no. I hung up after that. She made a few more attempts to call me, but I chose to ignore her and muffle her calls for the remainder of the day. My mother called me after I got back home, and she seemed fairly angry. It wasn't shocking at all because I knew she would be furious if I told her kid no. I was prepared for a fight, but at first she just kept complaining about how cruel everyone was to poor Molly and that she didn't think I would pick on some of my brothers more than others. She continued by telling me that she had finally found an apartment after looking for one for a very long time. It was very evident to me that before she wanted to move in, she had gone to ask for assistance from our uncle, my dad's younger brother, who has been running the family business since my father's passing. He was always intended to take over the company in the event that something happened to my father. I chose to take a different route because I had no desire to work for the family company. In addition, our uncle took over the firm because Percy and Molly had little interest in continuing it. In accordance with his will, my dad's equity interests were given to my mother, who today comfortably subsists on them. Although it's a rather profitable business, I suppose my dad did not anticipate that Molly would continue to live off of their funds after all these years. She too has an unconventional lifestyle. My mother stated that if she ended up giving her the money this time, things would get easier for her in the future, because she was finding it more and more difficult to support Molly. Because she likes to live extravagantly, she has not been able to save enough, which is why she was depending on me to help out with the apartment. It was all I could do not to roll my eyes at her. I told her that this was not my problem to handle, and she could tell Molly to either suck it up and keep living with her mother until she was 35, or get a real job or maintain a stable source of income so she could afford the kind of home she wanted. After that, my mother became very irate and began accusing me of being ungrateful, saying that I would never be able to stand up to her. If my upbringing by my parents had been different, I was now forced to assist my siblings in order to pay off my debts. I told her that my decision was final and that I didn't even understand her logic. Just as I was about to hang up, she said that if I continued acting in this way, she would have no choice but to leave and not communicate with me. And given that, based on the last 8 years, I believe that our contact has already been fairly minimal, that was really brave of her. Therefore, it's possible that making no contact at all won't have the impact she thinks it will. I was really enraged by her threat. She had no right to tell me that I was being unfair to my siblings because Percy and I had come to terms with the idea that things would be very different going forward because we knew she had her favorite. This was what I informed her when our dad went away. I was doing it, and it was fair. Not that I was going to try to act sorry about it. I was accustomed to receiving that kind of treatment from her, so I also informed her that she may leave and not to get in touch with me if she so desired. Molly was the only person who really existed, and she had stopped treating the rest of us like her own kids, and instead pretended that we were meant to breathe and live for her, just like she did. Well, Percy and I each had our own lives. We owed neither Molly nor her anything. After saying that, I felt a lot of relief because I had finally been able to get it all out. However, my mother raged at me and threatened to never speak to me again because of all I had said. And I laughed and informed her that I was okay with that, exactly like I had said moments before. It was also fortunate that she had decided on this quickly, because it meant I wouldn't even have to ask her to the wedding, and perhaps I could make room for someone else who is more worthy. That's what drew her interest the most. However, I hung up before she could ask me about it. I then blocked Molly as well as her. Molly had so been in error. It's true that people are drawn to ambitious, career-driven women. Otherwise, I never would have met my 37-year-old partner Jackson, and we never would have lasted nearly 5 years together. He has met both my mother and Molly a few times, but he is aware of our relationship. In addition, we are getting married in a few months, so a few weeks ago, we decided to celebrate our engagement with a modest, intimate celebration. I had been thinking about inviting my mom and Molly to the wedding, and I had finally concluded that maybe I should just be nice about it. However, I no longer felt that it was necessary. That was quite fulfilling then. However, Jackson was the one who got a message from my mother on social media yesterday. She informed him that even though I had blocked her and Molly everywhere, she still wanted me to know how deeply disappointed she was in me. She added that since I had made it clear where she stood, she and Molly had made the decision to permanently cut me off, and she hoped that I would be satisfied that I had finally severed our tenuous family ties. I'm not sure why I'm being held responsible, but it makes me feel horrible. I have to pay for telling my mother that I didn't mind if she interrupted me. First update. Hello to all of you. First and foremost, I would like to express my gratitude to each and every one of you for your love and support in the comment area. It helped me realize that my mother's feelings weren't important, and that I was just being naive and sentimental. They've never expressed concern for my emotions. I thus discussed this with Percy as well, and he shared the same viewpoint as many of you in the comments. They were merely attempting to control me verbally and emotionally in order to get me to say sorry to them. But I knew where I stood, and I'd done the right thing, so I didn't need to fall for it. It was Jackson who had informed me that my actions appeared to have wounded both Molly and my mother when we had spoken about this, and for that reason, I had been experiencing some remorse. He hadn't explicitly stated that he felt guilty, and that I should apologize, of course, but it was clear that he thought this whole thing was terrible, and was doing his best to support me, without feeling sorry for my mom and Molly. However, it dawned on me that Jackson was very close to his family, and it must have been difficult for him to see things go this way. And Molly and my mother had always behaved themselves admirably whenever he'd met them. Perhaps he was simply unaware of the precise level of tension in our relationship. So I had Percy fill him in on the details, and Jackson's perspective altered almost immediately. He informed me that his parents had never behaved in such a manner toward him or his siblings. Had they too, he would have cut them off without hesitation. Now that everything has been resolved, we have all blocked the two of them, after putting up with them for so long and keeping up the appearance that we are still a family when we haven't been for a while. It feels nice to be cutting our relationship. As a matter of fact, my mother has always given preference to Molly over Percy and me, and currently, we value our mental tranquility over her approval. In fact, I'm grateful that this encounter occurred because I believe it was much needed. Otherwise, we would have spent the rest of our lives putting on a show for other people. Second update. Hello, I haven't spoken to my mother in a week. Percy and I had no idea what was going on with them after that because we had blocked the two of them. However, our uncle reached us this morning. He didn't mention it, but he informed me that my mother had reportedly chosen to move half of her shares to Molly. However, he believed that Molly was incompetent. Thus, this was a bad idea. and he didn't think my mother should do such an action. He then got in touch with us, asking us to talk to our mother and persuade her not to do this. We didn't understand the significance of the transfer at first, but my uncle later clarified that in addition to my mother transferring those shares, she was also requesting that Molly be granted voting rights in the firm, since she was the one in charge of its operations. He knew that would get him into trouble, but he really wanted to avoid getting into that argument with my mother because she was so adamant about these things. Consequently, my mother was a shareholder with the ability to vote as well, but she had never used it because she thought my uncle's decisions would be best. But now that she was making demands, my uncle did not want Molly to have any authority or shares in anything pertaining to the firm because she lacked any business sense and was extremely incompetent. And for that reason, he had come to us in need of our assistance. To be honest, I think I would have freaked out in the same way if I had been in his shoes because Molly is a shareholder and has voting rights in my company. No, that is not at all what I would like. We decided to see our mother and have a face-to-face conversation with her about this after having a quick conversation with Percy and realizing that we could not allow this to continue. We didn't want to disappoint our uncle because, following the death of our father, he had truly looked out for us and was always there. He had been rather desperate. He was a good man who didn't deserve to experience this kind of hardship. That's why, despite our self-imposed vow to never speak to our mother again, we bothered to communicate with her a second time. Anyway, we went to her apartment, and Molly was there naturally, as we knew that having her around would complicate the whole conversation far more than it needed to. But we had committed to this, and we had to keep our word. We chose to ignore her, and instead told our mother that we had learned from our uncle that she was requesting that he grant her voting rights within the company. Our intention was to inform her that this was an absurd request. She ignored us at first, but after we repeated ourselves, we informed her that she had to stop ignoring us because the topic of our discussion was quite significant. When she eventually glanced up, she declared that we had no business telling her what to do or what not to do because she didn't want to talk to either of us anymore after the way we had treated her. She also wanted us to leave. When Molly returned to the room, we had no right to come back and start acting like we owned the place because we were now jealous of her. She explained that if she wanted to be an active member of the company, that would create an opportunity that neither of us had taken advantage of because we did not think it was valuable enough. I had to work very hard to remain calm because I did not want to mess this up. However, I tried to talk to my mother and reassure her that even in his dying days, our father had stated that he did not want us to become involved in the company and that if his brother wanted something to happen, then that was what would happen. His brother now wanted Molly to avoid the company and sincerely hoped that my mother would think about it since she would be disrespecting my dad if she disregarded him. That seemed to give them pause, but I assume Molly realized she would have no chance of joining the company if my mother was genuinely considering this. She then got into a confrontation with me, telling me that it would be best for me to go before they called the police because I had already decided to cut them off. I was never meant to be here because I made it very plain that we were no longer family. However, Percy rebuked her, and I made an effort to carry on arguing with my mother since I felt like I was making progress. I told her that my dad had made it very plain that he did not want any of us to get involved in the business since he had spent a lot of time and effort establishing it from the ground up, and that his brother was the only one he trusted with his own money. That was something he had actually stated to us a lot. This is precisely the kind of event he wished to avoid. We had all agreed to respect his wishes, which were to avoid any legal drama or disputes over the company. And because I didn't want to disobey what my father had stated, and because I at least had some business experience, this is one of the reasons I had the family business to forge my own path. I asked Molly to reconsider and told her that we could set aside our differences for the benefit of our father in order to avoid disobeying his final wishes because she lacked any common sense and would not know what to do. Molly simply kept yelling at us during this whole thing, telling us that I was jealous of her and that I could not bear to see her happy. I was attempting to dissuade our mother from doing this for that reason. However, my mother remained silently there. After a while, she asked Percy and I to go and instructed us to stop talking. She also promised to consider it and let my uncle know. She found it really offensive that we had blocked her, But now that we had treated her so disrespectfully, she asked us to go. We were so compelled to depart since she had no desire to interact with us. Molly, though, stayed. And for the time being, Percy and I are just hoping that she has changed her mind and won't be insistent that my uncle involve Molly in further business-related decisions. Jackson informed me that even if I didn't have a good relationship with my mother, I tried my hardest, and now it's up to her. I should be able to tell my uncle that I tried, at the very least. I've talked to my uncle about it, but he seems apprehensive because our mother hasn't given us any update. I'm crossing my fingers, nevertheless, that she would reconsider her opinion of Molly. 3 updates. After much consideration, my mother has decided that Molly does not deserve to have a role in how the business is handled. My father has made it quite obvious that his brother's decisions will have precedence. That was disclosed to us by our uncle 2 weeks ago. Furthermore, it is appropriate to respect him if he feels that Molly hasn't earned her position. She will therefore not have voting rights, but will undoubtedly receive preferred stock in the business. Molly received some of my mother's shares, so at least she will have a steady income going forward. I'm just grateful that she won't cause my dad's business to fail, but I'm still not in communication with my mother, and Percy isn't either. Guys, just so you know, that doesn't imply that our father left us nothing at all if he didn't leave us a piece in the business. All he left to my mother were shares in the company. However, Molly, Percy, and I inherited other possessions that, in my opinion, are not pertinent, which is the reason I left them out. I'm not sure why people automatically think that we didn't get anything. Nevertheless, that is untrue. Although I acknowledge that my father had a prejudice for Molly, he was undoubtedly not in the same situation as my mother. I suppose the fact that he was aware of her shortcomings made our relationship with him better. Anyway, I don't want to talk about him now that he's gone. I want to have happy memories of him. I'm not saying anything bad about him because of this. Does not imply that he was faultless. Indeed, it is true. So stop worrying about how I'm portraying my father as a saint in your remarks. Actually, I'm not. 4th update. Hello, well, it's been a few months and we absolutely adore the fact that we haven't had any communication at all with Molly or my mother. We're all incredibly joyful and it feels like all the toxicity has been lifted from our life. And because I'm getting married in a week, I'm happier than ever. It's evident that Molly and my mother did not get any of the invites, which were sent out approximately a month ago. I didn't think anyone would care, but a few of my family members told me that Molly and my mother freaked out and started pleading with everyone else not to come to my wedding when they realized they weren't invited while everyone else was. I suppose because my uncle may have told them about it since he was invited. But it seems that most people have overlooked them thus far. They won't be at my wedding because, well, I don't think they have that much power in the family. At least not against me. I'm not really sure what they even think they want to accomplish. Regardless, I thought it was funny that this would work, because it became an excuse to avoid interacting with Molly and my mother, who had been acting really annoyingly for the past few months. It seems that my mother moved into the penthouse apartment Molly had been gushing about, and put up our old house for rent. Additionally, it provided Molly with a reason to stay with her mother as she could never afford that apartment on her own. Molly also pretended that by taking care of her mother, she was being a nice daughter to her family. She so presented herself as the hero and gave her pitiful circumstances a good spin. My mother simply went along with it, portraying herself as the weak, dependent woman who is incredibly appreciative of her daughter's support. All right then, good for them. They would have become excellent storytellers and actresses if nothing else. All the same, Percy's magazine is doing great, and I hope he continues to have even greater success in the future. As for me, I'm managing to have a good career in addition to being married to the love of my life. It seems that everything Molly had said was incorrect, so it's her fault.